And then Christine, what about you? What was your experience in working with the population?
Yeah. So I worked in a couple different settings. I worked at a shelter, a transitionary. There's kind of multiple types of shelters. There's like immediate shelter housing, and then there's some transitional where you're actually waiting to get permanent housing, and you might have been approved for that, but it's not ready yet. And then there's permanent housing. So I didn't work with the emergency. I worked with sort of the people that were going to be placed, and their housing wasn't quite ready yet. So I saw clients there, and I was a clinical supervisor also. So I worked with some of the trainees and interns. And then I worked on a street team. So I eventually got assigned to work in a program where it was brand new, and we received a lot of funding from the city of Los Angeles. So I worked primarily in the Santa Monica area, which is under the city of Los Angeles umbrella. And so the street team was literally like me and several counselors, and I was leading the team out on the street in our sneakers and our jeans, talking to homeless people and trying to get them housed and trying to figure out what is standing in the way, what are the obstacles that we need to overcome in order to get them housed and placed. So I don't know if I should get into kind of all the responses now, or if that's, if you want me to talk about that yet,
Sure.
but
Yeah, maybe
I
that's a good
can.
overview. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there were quite a few different responses. It's a complicated issue. It isn't as simple as like, let's build, in my experience, it's not as simple as let's build housing and then put everybody into housing and then that's the solution. We ran across people that had chronic mental illness and substance use disorders. We ran across people that didn't want to be housed because in Santa Monica, California, they were in the outdoors, the weather's temperate here. There were a lot of resources in that community for homeless people. So you could get yourself a P.O. box and a shower every day. You could get yourself 3 square meals every day and no questions asked. You didn't have to stay. You didn't really have to do anything. You could just show up. We would take care of you, and then you could go back outside. You could sleep in the park. And we had multiple clients would say, or potential clients would say, I love being outdoors. I love being here. And I love being in this community. And what really surprised me, I think, when I started working outside was how the encampments actually created their own community with a sort of their own substructure of authority, where they had kind of people at the top that were sort of overseeing. They were kind of the leaders of the encampment in a way. And one encampment in particular, each person that was a member had kind of a job. There were some that were panhandlers that would go get money for the day. There were some that collected food or whatever. There was someone who was kind of in charge of getting medical supplies if they needed them. So they had their own structure and they didn't really want to give that up. So for us to come along and say, okay, well, we want to house you, well, that would mean a few things. It means leaving your friends behind. At this point, they had made friends, leaving your community behind, and you're not all going to necessarily get housed together. The housing that's available is Section 8 housing. We did build, which is lower income housing in lower income areas where there was a lot of drugs and violence and things like that. We did build some nicer housing in areas in Santa Monica, which is sort of an upper scale. Well, it used to be a community. It's not so much anymore. But even still, we could not guarantee that because we housed one person there, that we would be able to house everybody on that same street or all of their friends or community members together. And that was something that was incredibly important to a lot of the people that we met, is that they had wanted to stay with a community in some sense. We ran across a lot of people that, were very paranoid. What are you doing here? We don't trust you. One of the things that was very surprising is that in Santa Monica, the average person, the average homeless person, had fallen out of housing on an average 5 to 6 times. That means they had been housed through a homeless housing situation, but had not been able to maintain it. So they had been through this before and were not able to maintain it for a number of reasons. Once
What
they were
kind of reason?
housed, yeah, once they were housed, they were left to fend for themselves. So they didn't have a social worker or anybody helping them pay their bills. Most of them had mental health disorders and coexisting substance use disorders. So they would either relapse and end up getting kicked out of their apartment or their housing. Sometimes they'd get involved again with, prostitution, things that were just illegal behaviors. They would not take their medication, for example, and end up getting really ill. And we're talking about very severe, disorders, schizophrenia, psychotic disorders, things that made it very impossible for them to function without being on medication. So they wouldn't be able to pay their rent. They were getting disability checks, but they weren't able, their rent was maybe $200 a month or something out of their check, but they weren't able to pay it. There was nobody there that was like, hey, it's the first of the month, it's due, let's sit down together and write a check and send it to the landlord. So they would eventually get evicted. So they were either committing illegal activity or they were back, in their addiction again and very ill, or they weren't able to sustain, like, even being able to buy groceries for themselves. So we'd find them on the street. We had several people that would, say, I just felt claustrophobic. There was some, when you're chronically homeless for 25 years, there's an adaptability that you develop to being outside and living outside. And being inside for some of those people felt claustrophobic. They felt trapped. Even at the shelter, we had beds that were inside and beds that were outside, and people sometimes took the beds that were outside at the shelter because they didn't want to be indoors. So it was a very multi-layered issue. And these millions of dollars in grant money that we received this one year that I was on the street team. I was just telling all of you before we got on the live stream, out of the millions of dollars that we got, the total amount of people in all of LA that were housed through this one program, not other programs, this one program I'm talking about, was about 10 or so. The amount of people that were housed in my program specifically, and I had the Santa Monica area, was one person. And our team had talked with 150 people. So what happened in that scenario was we also, in order to get them housed, had multiple things that we needed to do for them.